Hello and welcome to the historynetwork.org podcast. If you'd like to become a patron of the podcast, please pop along to patreon.com/thehistorynetwork. Thanks to all our patrons who make this podcast possible. The historynetwork.org podcast, season 31, episode 8, The Armenian Massacre, part 2. This episode was written by Umit Kurt. Umit Kurt is a historian of the modern Middle East with a particular focus on the transformations of the imperial structures and their role in constituting the republican regime. Kurt is Polensky Fellow at the Van Leer Jerusalem Institute. He is author of several books in Turkish and English, including The Spirit of the Laws, The Plunder of Wealth in the Armenian Genocide. His recent book is The Armenians of Aintab, The Economics of Genocide in an Ottoman Province, published by Harvard University Press, May 2021. We'll pop a link to the book on Facebook and on the website. He is currently teaching in the Department of Islamic and Middle Eastern Studies at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. Kurt is the winner of the Discovery Early Career Research Award of 2021, given by the Australian Research Council. In his 1944 book Axis Rule in Occupied Europe, Raphael Lemkin says that genocide is composite and manifold, and that it signifies a coordinated plan of different actions aiming at the destruction of the essential foundations of life of a specific group. Collective dispossession, including plunder and spoliation, is only one of the many crimes that accompany and even fortify genocidal policies, or perhaps better said, expropriation and pillaging are important aspects of the political economy of genocide. As Martin Dean, an authority on Nazi looting and plundering of Jewish property, remarkably underlines, ethnic cleansing and genocide usually have a powerful materialist component. Seizure of property, looting of the victims, and their economic displacement are intertwined with other motives for racial and inter-ethnic violence and intensify their devastating effects. In the case of the Armenian genocide, the state-orchestrated plunder of Armenian property immediately impoverished its victims. Therefore, it was simultaneously a condition for and a consequence of the genocide. The Armenians of the Ottoman Empire experienced calamity of the greatest degree during World War I. Many males, including youth, were executed outright, while the rest, men, women, children, and the elderly, were deported to barren lands in Iraq and Syria. Those deported were subjected to every manner of misery: kidnapping, rape, torture, murder, and death from exposure, starvation, and thirst by every possible adversary: Ottoman gendarmes, Turkish and Kurdish irregulars, tribespeople, and the army. As Donald Bloxham emphasises, those who escaped deportation, primarily women and children, were forced to convert to Islam, as Muslim identity was considered a cornerstone of the new nation-state Turkey. Principally perpetrated by the Committee of Union and Progress elite who largely controlled the Ottoman government at the time, these events constitute what we now know as the Armenian genocide. Cloaked under the guise of war, this violence surpassed the war crimes of Russia, Germany and Austria-Hungary. Through these policies and their mechanisms, the CUP achieved its goal of eliminating the Armenian question and establishing Anatolia as a purified homeland for those whom the CUP elite deemed the true Turkish peoples. The Ottoman Empire's participation in World War I included a major campaign aimed at eliminating certain minorities, first and foremost Armenians, depicted by the CUP regime and Muslim society as dangerous and treacherous domestic enemies. This campaign led Armenians to be subjected to wartime mass deportation, internment, total extermination, and expropriation. However, the Ottoman Empire was by no means the only state to take measures against its own citizens. Both Central and Allied powers carried out brutal policies against domestic political suspects and enemy aliens during the years 1914 to 1918. For example, Russia's campaign against its enemy citizens quickly widened in scope to include the empire's large population of ethnic Germans to Russian subject Jews, Muslims, and others. Only in one state, according to Matthew Stibbe, the Ottoman Empire did this dynamic of destruction get pushed as far as genocide. In others, including Austria-Hungary, the quest for military security had murderous rather than genocidal consequences. Pursuing this global dynamic of violence during the Great War, the CUP campaign resulted in the forced displacement of more than 1 million civilians, the naturalization of a substantial portion of the imperial economy, and the transfer of extensive lands, assets and properties from the targeted minorities, Armenians, Greeks and Assyrians, to favoured groups. Historically, few governments formally took measures in times of war against their own subjects. However, as Eric Lohr underscores, World War I introduced systematic and brutal measures against enemy citizens and other civilians, measures that proliferated both during and after World War II. One cornerstone of the wartime campaign against Armenians in the Ottoman Empire was the confiscation of their properties and wealth, which were subsequently transferred to Muslim elites and used in reshaping the domestic economy as well as covering wartime expenses. These were among the radical practices of the CUP regime aimed at nationalising the economy. First, many businesses and properties were transferred to state institutions. Second, a lesser but substantial number of firms were transferred to reliable Muslim individuals and social institutions. More significant than the transfers themselves was the fact that these extraordinary measures belonged to a set of laws, regulations, rules and decrees that created a legal basis for a more systematic campaign against the movable and immovable properties of Armenians. In this capital transfer we see that genocide also created the circumstances to enable the complete fulfilment of the established policy of ethnic domination through expropriation. The sheer scale of actions constituting genocide could not be carried out by a single order from the central government. Therefore, local dynamics played an extremely important role in this destruction. As Jan T. Gross eloquently remarks, the participation of local populations is a necessary condition to ensure the effectiveness of genocidal policies. The CUP relied to a considerable extent on the cooperation of the local administrations and elites, political institutions, and ordinary citizens in various provinces of Asia Minor. Thus it can be claimed that as much as the Armenian genocide was a top-down process, it was equally led from the bottom up via a multitude of multifaceted relations between the central power and local authorities. Beyond any doubt, genocide and plunder were centrally planned, yet I argued that mass participation arose primarily from local incentives and motives. At the same time, one would not expect these motives to be unanimous or lacking nuance and change. They were both economic and social. On the economic side, the prospect of loot, for example, incentivized local collaborators to support massacres and deportations. Realizing the potential, the CUP leadership deliberately instrumentalised the promise of spoil and plunder to cajole public participation. The central government was well aware of the fact that provincial notables, local landowners and bigwigs, officials and a range of other people with vested interests tried to take possession of Armenians' wealth. These actors found themselves in a fortuitous position. Not only did their actions fulfill the ideological requirements of the regime, but these actions also brought material gain in the form of expropriated and pillaged Armenian properties. These factors in combination served to catalyse further the persecution of Armenians. Thus a reward mechanism was created by which the CUP could draw political and social support for decisions to deport and massacre Armenians. The profiteers justified their confiscation and seizure of Armenian wealth not as robbery or plunder, but as fair reward for their participation in the elimination of harmful and traitorous elements. Beyond base greed, the fervour with which they executed the genocide on the local level must be understood in part as a result of the rationalisation that they were acting in the service of the Ottoman state. On the social side, it is important to consider the role of stolen and confiscated Armenian assets in the integration and consolidation of the process of Turkification, or a Muslim-controlled milli-iktisat national economy. The main purpose of Turkification was the dispossession of countless thousands of Armenians and their systematic removal from virtually every sector of the economy by transferring Armenian movable and immovable properties and businesses to Turkish hands. The participation of the local populace in robbing their Armenian neighbours is seen as the product of an increasing radicalisation and loss of restraint resulting from the breakdown of social ties along ethnic, religious and economic lines. But the role of the local population as witnesses to the Armenian genocide and the impact of the radical Turkish economic exploitation of the Armenians led to bitter social conflicts over scarce resources. While official CUP policy intended for all Armenian property to be confiscated for the benefit of the Turkish administration, material rewards clearly acted as an incentive for collaboration at the regional level. Administrators recognised this motive and tolerated or encouraged it as they saw fit, often taking their own cut. Consequently, the Armenian genocide was much more complicated than the outcome of a simple top-down decision-making process in which the CUP leadership assigned, enforced and oversaw exterminationist policies, while local Muslims acted as passive, indifferent bystanders. Thank you, Ümit Kurt, for that script on the Armenian massacre. If you have an idea for a script, just drop us a line, info@thehistorynetwork.org, and discuss your idea with us. We'd love to hear from you. Once again, if you've not yet become a patron and would like to, then just pop along to Patreon, patreon.com/thehistorynetwork, and find out about that there. Thanks again for listening. You've been listening to the historynetwork.org podcast, written by Ümit Kurt, read by Nick Barker.